Hello, y'all. Welcome to my presentation. My name is Yashwat Singh, and today I will be presenting you my presentation called Towards a Sustainable Future. So for my topic, I decided to do urbanization. Urbanization is a transformation from rural to urban environments because of a population shift where people migrate to city, towns, and neighborhoods. Basically, is cutting down habitats and replacing them with human buildings, so like schools, cities, education, stuff like that. And as more people move into these areas, the cities become more populated, thus forcing them to further expand by cutting down natural habitats. Obviously, this will be bad for the wildlife in the habitat because essentially we are cutting down their home in order to make it ours, forcing them to leave and migrate somewhere else. Sustainability in this context of the topic means to develop cities in a way that meets human needs without destroying ecosystems or future resources. So we can meet the need to expand our cities in order to make new space for residents, but we don't have to force these animals out of their habitats. Um, for our sustainable development goals, the two goals that relate to this is SDG 11 and SDG 15. 11, it makes cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, which is basically balancing urban development with environmental protection. SDG 15 has a lot of different things in its goals, but the main important one that relates to this topic is preventing biodiversity loss. Because further on, you realize that urbanization does cause a lot of biodiversity loss. And lastly, I'll end it with a quote with Simran Kumar from my interview. Too much urbanization leads to no places to go. As for the current challenges, we start with how urbanization leads to lower genetic diversity, biodiversity, and population density. For our first source, in the article called Small Towns Limit Dispersal and Reduce Genetic Diversity in Populations of Texas Horned Lizards by Wall, Kevin, et al. It's basically a study on how the urbanization of a small town led to a lower genetic diversity of the Texas longhorned or the Texas horned lizards, which is basically a common lizard uh, in South Texas. And the reason why it caused lower genetic diversity is because it says right here, genetic patterns suggest dispersal occurs over short distances and is inhibited across areas with a high percentage of impervious surface in major roads. This basically means that infrastructure like roads, houses, and roads and houses, they cause they restrict the movement of these lizards. That's also restricting the gene flow because these lizards are not allowed to move freely within their habitat. They're forced to be confined in a space. Thus, they can't really spread their genes. And if they can't spread their genes, they also lead to a lower biodiversity. This is also bad for the lizards because it will make it harder for the species to adapt and survive to a changing environment, making them more vulnerable to disease, climate change, and environmental stress. And for our second quote here, Texas horned lizards living in small towns have lower genetic diversity, higher differentiation, and smaller effective population sizes than populations located in more natural areas. So this goes to show that even if it's a small town, it will still affect the genetic diversity of an animal over a natural area. And again, this kind of backs up this quote right here. Our results show that even low levels of urbanization can have negative effects on small terrestrial vertebrates. So in the connection to the SDGs or the development goals, even small towns negatively affect wildlife, proving that no matter the size, we should always be planning to, or at least consider planning, protecting nearby urban ecosystems. If urbanization doesn't account for wildlife movement, it will hurt its natural heritage and reduce the biodiversity around cities. For SDG 15, it states that it highlights how a habit for fragmentation caused by poorly planned urban growth can lead to lower genetic diversity, and this literally combats SDG's goal of not lowering biodiversity, because lower genetic diversity leads to lower biodiversity. And again, SDG 15 is all about not causing or preventing human biodiversity expansion, which it aims to protect. So for the solution, I decided that we should create natural corridors. Natural corridors are basically strips of habitat like green belts, forests, or riversides to meet the goals of sustainability and biodiversity. These can be like, parks, gardens, protected zones, basically things that connect fragmented habits, allowing these animals to travel safely to mate, hunt, and spread genetic diversity. Again, this allows them to not be confined in in a certain area. It allows them to travel, allows them to spread their diversity and, again, spread their biodiversity. The people involved that can support this change is residents by support local conversation efforts, plant native species, and avoid paving over gardens. Communities can also advocate for park expansions, create green spaces, support wildlife-friendly zones. And lastly, governments can enforce policies that require developers to preserve or restore green corridors in city plans. However, one problem is that in order to create these corridors, they have to sacrifice land for these natural preserves. This will in turn increase real estate value because there's not enough space for everyone, and will also create population density. However, this can be rebutted by offering incentives or tax breaks to developers for including green infrastructure. Austin, Texas is a big example of a city with a bunch of natural corridors who also offer tax incentives because they added them. So as for our challenge number 2, or the problem number 2, rapid urbanization will lead to habitat loss. So according to Cito, Karen, Burak, and Lucy, in the article Biodiversity Impacts and Conversation Implications of Urban Land Expansion projected to 2050, it's an article that explains how urbanization will continue to expand as the human population grows. People will want to move to cities, education, healthcare, but this global trend of urbanization will threaten a third of all of vertebrate species because of driving habitat loss. It also leads to a decrease in biodiversity. So some quotes right here, like growing cities tend to engulf and devour their surrounding lands, and often at the expense of biodiversity. Urban land expansion is a contributor driver of habitat loss, and for around 1/3 of the species assessed. And they predict that by the year 2050, these habitat loss from expansion will be impacted by a third of vertebrate species. And over the next 30 years, they think that the urban population is expected to increase by 2.5 billion people, making it one of the defining transformations of the 21st century. It will need land to expand to accommodate these new urban residents. So in connection to, so basically as the human population grows, cities become more and more popular throughout the years, and this will only lead to more habitat loss because, again, cities need space to fill people in, for new residents, and so they can only take that space from the natural habitat, which again affects these vertebrates. So in connection to the SDGs, in SDG 11, the article highlights unchecked urban sprawl destroys natural areas and reducing green public spaces. It shows the need of integrating biodiversity into urban planning and safeguarding natural heritage, which aligns on its emphasis to access green space and ecosystem protection with cityscapes. The data on SDG 15 states that a loss on habitats threatens up to 39% of species biotic degradation caused by urban sprawl. It speaks directly to like 15.5 and 15.9 around halting habitat destruction and incorporating biodiversity into planning frameworks. So for the solution in this problem, I decided that we should do inward development. So for some context, urban sprawl, which is basically what most cities do, is where they spread outwards towards undeveloped, fragmenting ecosystems. Undeveloped basically means the natural wildlife, the natural land. And they, instead of going outwards, they should focus on building within existing urban areas, making them denser but more efficient. So basically, building on top of vacant lots, building on top of buildings, it's inward development. Residents can do this to protest to stop expanding citizens from, or stop cities from expanding into natural ecosystems. Communities can also protest or push for zone changes, allow mixed use development and affordable housing in already built up areas. Lastly, governments can implement urban growth boundaries, revise zoning laws, invest in public transit and infrastructure upgrades to support these denser populations. However, one problem that will come with this is that most cities are not really capable or equipped to handle these dense populations. Again, we're talking about buildings on top of buildings on top of buildings. It's going to have to be some really high-tech infrastructure, but we can do this by upgrading this infrastructure and finding funding for it. Queen China is a popular example of this. It's basically a city where, again, it has buildings on top of buildings, basically layering them so it can focus on expanding vertically instead of horizontally onto the natural wildlife. So as for my personal reflection, through this project, I've learned how urbanization has serious consequences for wildlife, especially through habitat destruction and fragmentation. I was surprised to see that even in small towns like those in Texas, it can reduce genetic diversities in species like the horned lizard in Texas. I've also learned that sprawling cities around worldwide are contributing to the loss of biodiversity, and this project is projected to be even worse in 2050, as we've seen in one of the sources, unless we change how we build and expand our cities. This research changed how I think about sustainability. It's I used to think it only meant like, recycling, saving energy, or conserving on water, but I understand that it's about protecting ecosystems, not just those out remote, but even ecosystems nearby my city or house. Designing greener cities and sharing the land with other species is sustainability. It's where we can meet our human needs while also protecting the wildlife and not hurting them. It's about making choices that help both the people and nature thrive. So lastly, I think that urban growth doesn't have to come at the cost of nature if we plan it wisely. And so these are my citations, and that will be all for this project. Thank you for watching.